Honorable Vian Pillai, Chairperson, Honorable Alvik Maharaj, Honorable Andiselai Andimaitonga, Honorable William Ngavoka, and myself, Honorable
Order. Is there a seconder? I now give the floor to the Honorable Niko Nawaikula to speak on his motion.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. This motion is a very serious one. It is calling for bipartition on both sides of the House to look at, review cost of living. And Honorable Speaker, may I start by extending to all the members of our Muslim family in Fiji, Eid Mubarak, and may Allah reward you with goodness. And, seriously, Honorable Speaker, I also appeal to all the members to agree that when we debate this motion, we put aside our political positions and instead let us all focus our thoughts and contributions to the welfare of those fellow citizens who have lost their full-time employment as a consequence of COVID-19. Having said that, I'm just been informed that 758 employees of Fiji Airways have been made redundant. Mr. Speaker, every member in this House will be familiar with the term Wasota. And I can tell you from my own recent conversations with many citizens, they are struggling. They are in desperate need of help today, even right now. But they will Wasota and carry the pain and the struggle as they try to keep themselves and their families safe from the coronavirus, and to do so without that weekly pay packet that they all depend on to sustain themselves, and not knowing when their jobs will return. I can only imagine the level of stress and trauma of current situation is imposing on these sons and daughters of Fiji. So to encourage everyone here today to speak only, I'm asking for members to speak only on the motion and its merits in a truly bipartisan way. Please remember that. And I appeal to each of you to think with compassion and empathy of the daily battle that so many thousands of our people are facing every day for their very survival. They will continue to face this in the coming weeks and months. So let us come together today in a united effort to find a positive way forward that will help bring relief to the suffering of our people. And firstly on that, I would like to commend the Honourable Minister for the Economy and Attorney General, Honourable Kayum, for his efforts to place Fiji in a prime position to benefit when Australia and New Zealand, our main tourism source markets, decide to expand their travel bubble, so that includes the Pacific. And may I also recommend to the Attorney General that he include in his continuing discussion in this area our shadow spokesman on tourism and civil aviation, Honourable William Ngavoka, in his efforts. As I'm sure we already know that Honourable Ngavoka has many years of valuable experience in tourism that we can all benefit from in his inclusion. Trust me, Honourable Speaker, when I say that the Australians and New Zealanders will be impressed by our willingness to work together for this cause. For once, let us act in this House as one big happy family, dedicated in unity to the welfare of the bigger family of Fiji. Mr. Speaker, I don't think anyone in this House or in the country is happy to read that about 80% of callers of Empower Pacific for counselling are asking for food and other assistance, or that our tourism arrivals for April 2020 total just 678, compared to 76,813 arrivals for the same month last year. That represents a 99.2% reduction, which underlies the size of our family problem. The economy will decline in 2020 by more than 4.3%. I could go on, Mr. Speaker, but I hope I have made the point. We are in a national crisis, and we must come together. We know that a team that plays well and hard together is a team that can win. Our role as opposition is to keep the government of the day accountable, and we endeavor to do that in the best of our ability. But with COVID-19, we must combine our forces and face the crisis together and work as a team, Fiji, to overcome it. Our people are looking to us to step up and act together and work to find solutions to a crushing problem. The biggest burden of this is carried by the people and their families. Mr. Speaker, this is why I have placed this motion before this House. Tens of thousands of people are now unemployed with no income. The average payout to workers who have lost jobs from FNPF and government so far is $692, and this cannot sustain a family for more than 6 weeks. Not all landlords have been accommodating in rental deductions. Some merchants have increased prices and have been selling expired stock. I have received a number of complaints about banks dragging their feet in honoring the agreement in terms of interest and principal payments. Today, some are charging customers with reduced or no income interest on the interest post, and some are still deducting repayments from customers who have applied for a freeze due to hardship, and then take their time to reverse this and give back the deducted amount, having already added even more stress to their already stressed out customers. I think that's shameful. We need to establish what the cost of living to our people, and this will allow us to reassess the assistance we are currently providing our laid-off workers to help reduce the stress, trauma, and financial burden on them. There are many other aspects of the crisis that we can tackle by reaching out to each other across the floor of the House to establish a spirit of bipartisanship. Let the darkness of this pandemic bring out our nation, be the catalyst to bring forth the bright star of cooperation between all 51 members of this House today, as we work together to find the solution that our people need and that as we are duty-bound to provide. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Nawaikula for his motion. I give the floor to the Honourable Prime Minister. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Honourable Speaker, I rise to speak on the motion by the Honourable Niko Nawaikula to establish a special committee under Standing Order 129 to review the cost of living. Mr. Speaker, Honourable Nawaikula has just mentioned the number of people that have been retired from Fiji Airways. And that's the continuation of what COVID-19 is doing to us. That's not the beginning of it, nor is it the end of what COVID-19 is doing to us. So I must say that it's rather inconvenient, waste of much needed resources and precious time when we are at war with COVID-19. A deadly disease known during our time. It's not only us, but the rest of the world that is battling to find a solution. It is obvious that the opposition is using the current situation for their own political gain. It is understandable, Mr. Speaker, that in a world recession, it is expected that inflation rate would fall due to low demand and decline in economic activities. The nation is currently going through a very difficult phase. We are dealing with the impact of a global pandemic and the recent natural disaster, which affected our rural maritime islands and parts of the Western and the Central Division. Mr. Speaker, unlike the opposition, this government has always prioritized the interests of the Fijian people in difficult circumstances. The opposition have always come up with their own self-interest, and this is reflected in the division amongst themselves. This is not the first time. This is not the time. This is not the time for division in our country. It's currently being portrayed by a member of the other side of the House. Rather, this is the time to work together, stand united in the fight against this global crisis. Mr. Speaker, I don't see a need for a special committee to review the cost of living when Fiji is already fighting so many challenges like the rest of the world, and when inflation rates are already low. We should utilize our resources economically and sensibly at this time and not divert resources to review such propaganda when we need everyone's commitment to get the country back to its business. Such reviews are no doubt needed, but we have to prioritize our efforts where needed, which unfortunately the member on the other side cannot see. My government has come up with a response budget to assist business, employers, and Fijians who have been affected during this time, and will continue to do so as the situation unfolds. Mr. Speaker, I trust Fijians are well informed of the current economic situation. The Reserve Bank of Fiji, in their monthly review, are keeping Fijians updated on the economic situation, including employment market update, the sector progress, inflation rate, and monetary policy adjustment. Government also, through the Ministry of Economy, has announced a number of measures to assist those who have recently become unemployed, and also those who wish to start business in micro enterprises and existing small and medium enterprises. This will, amongst other things, sustain livelihoods. Based on these remarks, Honourable Speaker, I do not support the motion. Thank you, sir.
I thank the Honourable Prime Minister. Honourable Biman Prasad, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support the motion by Honourable Niko Nawaikula. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister has obviously rubbished the motion, but I think, Mr. Speaker, it's very important. I think we can use the opportunity of that committee that has been suggested to feed into the policies or the measures that we might need to take in the budget for 2020 and 2021. And let me give you the reason why the government should not reject this motion and take this motion as a very important suggestion. I think it doesn't help for this government to continue to level the opposition as a group which is hell-bent on making political mileage out of this. We can say the same thing about the government, Mr. Speaker. We can say the same thing. And there are many instances where they're trying to do that and not looking at seriously what the priority should be. If you look at the forecast by the Reserve Bank of the Reserve Bank on the economy, while the April statement says that the economy might contract by about 4.3%, Mr. Speaker, if we analyze the conditions in which we are globally today and the impact of that on Fiji, and if we assess the various sectors of the economy and what's happening there, then I think we should prepare ourselves for a contraction of the economy this year, not by 4.3% or 5%. I think we should look at a huge contraction. And my projection, Mr. Speaker, is that we could have something like between 15 to 20% contraction of the economy in 2020. And the impact that that is going to have on the poor and the vulnerable is going to be huge. If you look at the poverty statistics, 28 to 30%. The other 20%, Mr. Speaker, have always been on the margins. And we know that many of them are losing jobs, working on reduced hours. Those on the margins, 20% on the margins, you could be easily looking at 50% of households in this country within matters of months who would be falling below the poverty line. And Mr. Speaker, let me remind the Prime Minister about those families. In fact, if you look at the food basket of families who fall below the poverty line, bulk of it is about food. Forget about income poverty, we could see many families falling into food poverty, which means that they will not be able to afford food on the table. And that is why it is absolutely important for us, and I think the suggestion for a bipartisan parliamentary committee to look at how we can deal with those scenarios through our budget process next month is a good suggestion. You know, it's no point. I mean, they keep talking about working together. And I thought Honorable Niko Nawaikula for once was very conciliatory. He was for once very conciliatory to the government. Very conciliatory. You know, in his very conciliatory expression and genuineness, he suggested this committee. I mean, you can't accuse him of not extending the opposition's hand to deal with this issue. Yeah.
Order.
Mr. Speaker, it's very important for us to understand this. We know that we are in uncharted waters. This is unprecedented for any country in the world, what we are going through. And this is the opportunity for us to prioritize, for the government to prioritize, and look at how we can sustain our families in the next 6 months or the next 1 year or the next 18 months. This problem, this economic disaster that we are going to see is not going to go away in 6 months or 1 year or 18 months. It's probably going to take us 2 or 3 years to deal with this. And in that period, we need to be very careful how we devise plans to look our families, especially those who would be falling below the poverty line. And here, Mr. Speaker, if I can make the suggestion, I mean, when VAT was imposed on basic food items, we raised this issue as a very serious one. Now, it is even more important. It is even more important, Mr. Speaker, for us to look at the 9% VAT on the basic food items. And as I said, for a large number of families who will fall below the poverty line, who are below the poverty line already, the bulk of what's in the basket, consumption basket, is food. Is food, Mr. Speaker. Many people are prioritizing, many families are prioritizing, holding back expenditure because they are worried about putting good food on the table for their families and for their children. Now, this usual argument, Mr. Speaker, that, okay, if we remove VAT from basic food items, because if you exempt basic food items, the rich and those who can afford it are also going to benefit. But let me suggest this to the government. If you're looking at 50% of the families falling below the poverty line, Mr. Speaker, and you exempt VAT on basic food items, those who can afford it, the rich and those in the middle class, if they are able to save some money, they will spend it elsewhere. So the government would get some of those revenue back from a greater spending. That will be good for the economy, good for businesses. And this is the kind of things that we should be looking at. And I think a committee to look at the impact of cost of living, the impact of food, prices on our families, food poverty that we might see in the future, Mr. Speaker, is very, very important. We cannot ignore those families. This is one time that we need to come together. This is one time that we need to worry about those 50% of the families in this country who would be struggling to make ends, Mr. Speaker. So I would urge the government to stop worrying about what is the opposition's plan. Government also has a plan to win the next election. So does the opposition. But let's not accuse each other of using this opportunity, this situation. Yes, we will be critical of government when we need to, because this is not also a time to let government go loose. Because if you let them loose, they are going to make a bigger mess of things. And it is important for them to also understand that when we hold government to account, we do it with genuineness and sincerity, Mr. Speaker. So it is important for us to look at this motion in a non-partisan manner, as Honourable Nawaikula suggested. Mr. Speaker, there are many things that we need to talk about. How to deal with the crisis in front of us or with us. But, Mr. Speaker, we will have more time. There will be other opportunities that we will have in this Parliament this week and during the budget. But before the budget, Mr. Speaker, I would urge the government, and we ourselves have been writing about ideas. There are a lot of people who are suggesting things. We're all wanting good for this country. We all want to be part of the Trans-Tasman bubble. We want it to happen as soon as possible. But, Mr. Speaker, there are some things that are not in our hands and beyond our control, and we'll have to rely on what others do. But there are things that we can do ourselves, that we can look at, we can reprioritize, look at the expenditure, look at the specific cases. There are people who are coming to us, Mr. Speaker, on a daily basis, and we try and articulate those things with the government through our public statements or through directly talking to ministers, directly talking to government backbenchers. We want to deal with the issues. That's what the spirit should be, Mr. Speaker, and that's what we should all do. And therefore, I suggest to the government side, despite what the Prime Minister has already said, he should reconsider his stand and support this motion, and let's set up a committee to deal with that very specific thing, Mr. Speaker. So I want to support this motion, and I hope that the government will also change its track and support the motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I give the floor to the Honourable William.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I rise to speak in support of the motion by the Honourable Nawaikula. I think it is timely, especially the situation we face today. Honourable Speaker, on the CNN, there were reports of people in Los Angeles lining up to pick up food from the food bank, driving in their BMWs and Mercedes. Now, this is an indication of what Fiji and the global community face today. And there is every indication that COVID-19 will be around for some time. There are moves in Europe, in the US, and the UK to start opening up. At the same time, there are warnings from the medical profession saying there can be a second wave and just as bad. So, Honourable Speaker, it will be useful if we relook at the morals that we have today. And I believe every country in the world will have to do this. I believe the days of globalization is gone. Travel by air will take years to come back. And people, countries, will now have to survive on their own. I think there's going to be more regional trade. And I'm one who supports our linkages to the travel bubble between Australia and New Zealand. And I have highlighted in a Facebook page an article where I said that if you want to be part of that, we must improve our health system and our overall hygiene standards in this country. Research has been conducted by the University of Queensland and with the tourists, and they are now saying that health is going to be key in my choice of destination. Fiji has a huge tourism industry. We have world-class products. We need to also have world-class health system. We can do it, but it's a matter of commitments to a policy to save ourselves, save that $2 billion hole that will go if you don't do something about it. So, Honourable Speaker, a committee like this can hear all these things. When I see those people in the BMWs and Mercedes queuing up for food bank, and in my village, I look out into the sea and I see our people fishing, and I'm saying, I think at the end of the day, countries like Fiji will fare better than other countries in the world because we have our natural resources. We have the freshwater mussels, we have the prawns from the streams and eels, and all that food is available to us. But we have to organize ourselves, hence the call of this committee, to try and streamline all this so that everyone in this country has enough food. Food is going to be very critical, Honourable Speaker. And how do we develop this? How do we restructure our communities to be more self-sufficient? As a matter of interest, Honourable Speaker, when you hear today that 750 staff from Fiji Airways are being released, and Jack's releasing staff, it may happen, Honourable Speaker, is that the private sector will no longer be able to provide what they've been providing all this while in creating that part of the economy and sustaining lives on this planet. We may just have to go back to big government. I believe, Honourable Speaker, big government will come into play now. Government will now have to secure the resources for everyone to have enough on their table. Interestingly, Honourable Speaker, about 100 years ago was the upheaval in the world with communism, starting off in Russia. And you know, communism became an ideology that dominated the last century. So it may just be that 100 years today that this is happening again, that we may have to take control of the factors of production, control the lives of everyone. It may have to come to that. So all these things, Honourable Speaker, need to be understood. And I believe that a committee like this should be able to hear from the people and help in crafting the way forward to survive this pandemic, Honourable Speaker. So, Honourable Speaker, I would urge this Parliament to vote and support this motion to be put very simply, Honourable Speaker. This crisis is way bigger than the Fiji First government. What they have in mind, what they want to do, will fall far short of what needs to be done. And it's more frightening that they continue to believe that their consultation within themselves, the way they've done things in the past, will help Fiji out of this crisis. That is the frightening aspect of it. I think they should realize that, and they should reach across the aisle, accept this motion, and we do it together. Don't worry about the division on this side of the house. At least we talk to each other. At least we talk to each other. At least we are a political party of people with ideas. And I'd love to be a fly in the wall when the AGM is held by Fiji First, because I know nobody says anything. So, Honourable Speaker, I would support this motion very, very strongly. Thank you.
I give the floor to the Honourable Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, I'd like to actually talk on the motion. Perhaps the mover of the motion should have actually amended the motion, because the motion talks about to review the cost of living. All the speakers, apart from the Honourable Prime Minister, spoke about the impact of COVID-19, and in particular spoke about unemployment. They talked about the effects of COVID-19 on the sustained livelihoods of people, as opposed to the cost of living. Cost of living is different to unemployment, because you can actually have high cost of living and have full employment, or a very low employment. Or you could have unemployment and also high cost of living. So I'd like to just draw that attention, and again, kind of, to use the phrase from the other side, behoves us to think that people are here wanting to set up a committee, yet do not know the difference between unemployment and cost of living. Mr. Speaker, sir, Honourable Professor, you should know that. Mr. Speaker, sir, just to bring it back, to bring it back to what cost of living actually means, Mr. Speaker, sir. The Bureau of Statistics, Mr. Speaker, sir, has what you call a CPI index, Consumer Price Index. The base year is 2014. We have what we call a total weight of 1,000. Now that's broken up into different aspects of our day-to-day living. So out of the 1,000 index, you have 12 categories that actually goes towards measuring the inflation rate. Food and non-alcoholic beverages have a weighting of 347.1. Transport, 138.7. Housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuels, 126.8. Alcoholic beverages, tobacco, and narcotics, including kava, is 105.7. Education, 75.3. Furnishings and household equipment is 50. Communications, 44.2. Restaurants and hotels, 28.8. Clothing and footwear, 21.7. Recreation and culture, 16.1. Health, 14.1. And miscellaneous goods and services, 30.5. Mr. Speaker, sir, the cost of living, Mr. Speaker, sir, should be seen as the overall change in price of the whole basket of these items for which prices rise and fall. You can't simply say cost of living has increased just because the price of yangona has gone up or the price of dal has gone up. It's a combination of all these items that people use on a daily basis to measure your cost of living. Apart from inflation numbers, Mr. Speaker, sir, we should holistically assess other indicators, such as change in income levels. So, for example, if the general income of the country is increased and the prices have remained the same, or the prices have not increased relative to the increase in the wages, then obviously you can say the cost of living has gone down. Similarly, if people are getting tax reductions, if people's electricity bills are being subsidized, or education fees that they used to pay before is now no longer paid by them but paid by the state or the big government, then again that has an impact on the cost of your living, because it depends on how much money you have left in your pocket at the end of the day after being paid. Mr. Speaker, sir, in respect of that, let me highlight the average inflation between 1970 to 1979. It was 10.2%. The average inflation between 1980 and 1989 was 7.2%. The average inflation between 1987 to 1997 was 5.1%. The average inflation between 1990 and 1999 was 4.1%. The average inflation between 2000 and 2009 was 3.8%. And the average inflation since 2010 to 2019 is 2.8%. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, inflation over the past 5 years has averaged around 2.4%. End-of-year inflation stood at negative 0.9% in 2019. Since October 2019, Fiji has been consistently recording negative inflation for the past 7 months, with inflation in April 2020 recorded negative 1.3%. But as has been highlighted by the Honourable Prime Minister, whilst the world economy has slowed down, obviously it has meant, because of less demand for goods and services, the prices automatically fall down. So inflation actually has been affected. Similarly, the price of the competition between the Saudis and the Russians has meant that the price of fuel has dramatically decreased, which has meant we need to spend less to buy more fuel. The diesel generators run by EFL in Vanuatu to supply Madwata and various other places, the cost of running those generators has actually come down for EFL. But of course, these are all fluctuations that are subject to world market prices and geopolitics. Mr. Speaker, sir, the average inflation from 2010 to 2019, of course, is the lowest compared to any decade post-independence. Now, what are some of the other what we call domestic issues that actually affect cost of goods and services? Cyclones is critically important in that respect. We see, for example, kava, everybody talks about kava. The price of yongona shot through the roof after Cyclone Winston. You go and try and buy a bundle of beans or some bhindi or bhaji or dal or cassava, the areas that actually produce those fruits and vegetables actually get affected. Obviously, the price of those things will go up. As more production comes in, obviously, then the prices comes down. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, in respect of what the Honourable Member is proposing of having a committee, there's no need to do that. What I think he was probably, mistakenly, maybe as Honourable Prasad has said, what is the first time that he's actually spoken in that manner, maybe he actually had a genuine interest in respect of talking about the issues pertaining from or emanating from the impact of COVID-19. And we do recognize that, Mr. Speaker, sir. And the contraction will be massive. We all know that. As I said this morning, the only certainty about COVID-19 is the uncertainty, because we do not know how it will pan out. We do not know whether there will be a second wave, a third wave, or fourth wave. We do not know if there will be a vaccine or not, or should they be required for a vaccine. We do not know when the travel bubble will open, as much as we want it to open as soon as possible. Even within Australia, the different states have different rules. Queensland does not want to open. Some of the other states want to open. We are trying to get the Australians and New Zealanders to talk about the travel bubble in the Pacific as individual countries, not as the Pacific Island countries, but as Fiji, as Tonga, as Samoa, because we are very different to the other Pacific Island countries. We have the only WHO certified testing lab that tests for actually COVID-19. The other Pacific Island countries actually have to send their swabs overseas. And we do not know the integrity of those swabs when they come back or by the time they come back. Our health system is different. Our airline connectivity is different. We don't have anybody dying from COVID-19. We have a huge recovery rate. 15 out of the 18 have recovered from COVID-19. So we are very different. So in respect of opening up the travel bubble, we're obviously quite keen on it, but we don't know when it will happen. Now, Mr. Speaker, so the honourable members talk about bipartisanship, etc. They also know that we actually gave a COVID-19 response budget. Because obviously we knew, and everybody knew, as Honourable Nawaikula himself has highlighted, tourism numbers dropped, it just fell off the cliff. We don't have any tourists, period, from overseas. So all the revenue, departure tax, STT, VAT, ECAL, jobs related to that sector, employment, superannuation collection, PAYE has all gone. This is why we put in place the COVID-19 budget response, because we had to recalibrate our revenue to be able to meet the expenditure and recalibrate our expenditure. As anybody knows that you have a budget on a yearly basis, based on your projected revenue and your projected expenditure. So that in itself was a response. And again, we were criticized for that. But that move, Mr. Speaker, sir, has helped us be able to position ourselves better, in which we also had an allocation directly of $60 million. As announced last week on Friday, $30 million of that will be expended immediately in the next couple of months, where anybody that's now unemployed is not able to access the general account of FNPF, and again, they criticize us for that. Australia has now allowed Australians to withdraw the FNPF, the equivalent of FNPF, the superannuation funds, up to $10,000. 600,000 Australians got unemployed in 1 month, nearly 2/3 the population of Fiji. And they've allowed that too. We are saying now, Mr. Speaker, sir, we have also, as announced on Friday, that now the second wave of withdrawals, anybody that's now become unemployed or took out from the first wave of withdrawals, they can, Mr. Speaker, sir, from the general account, withdraw up to $1,100. If they don't have that money, Mr. Speaker, sir, government will pay them the money. We will top it up. And as the weeks go by, Mr. Speaker, sir, more and more Fijians won't be able to withdraw from the general account, and they'll all depend on government. We are here for the long haul. We're not here for some quick wins. Mr. Speaker, sir.
Order.
Mr. Speaker, sir. So therefore, it can happen for the next 6 months, can happen for the next 9 months. You can actually have a budget that will be heavily skewed towards simply paying unemployment benefits. And, Mr. Speaker, sir, which means it'll put a huge pressure on your need to borrow because your revenue streams have dried up. They don't mention any of this. The critical, they don't understand the basic economics of this. Mr. Speaker, sir, it's a fact. It's a fact, Mr. Speaker, sir. They talk about FNPF without knowing that there's a difference between the preserved account and a general account. They also don't acknowledge the fact, Honourable Charles should know this. He should know this because during his time, in those days, the FNPF had about 26 grounds for withdrawal. 26 grounds. You see, the Honourable Member who's talking a lot does not understand the difference between a savings bank and a superannuation fund. Absolutely no understanding. Mr. Speaker, sir. No idea. This is the kind of attitude they have, and they want to have a bipartisan committee. No understanding. Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, therefore, one cannot even fathom the idea of having a subcommittee, firstly, on a motion that talks about unemployment, but actually is worded for cost of living. On the other hand, you have members from the other side talking about superannuation funds, saying it's their own money as if it's a savings bank. In the general account, I think you people need to talk to your member there. Mr. Speaker, sir, maybe some of you can no longer talk to her. Mr. Speaker, sir, the fact of the matter is this. Even prior to this, in the general account, you could withdraw your funds for medical purposes, for educational purposes, for funeral purposes, because that's what the general account is for. Meet those expenses. Mr. Speaker, sir, the other thing that we have also done, as announced, Mr. Speaker, we have had numerous and very in-depth, almost daily consultations with huge number of people from the different sectors in Fiji. The different ministers have been doing that. The Minister for Health, the Minister for Transport, Natural Disaster, Commerce, Women, Local Government. We're meeting banks, meeting tourism players, everybody, fisheries, forestry, everybody's meeting with all the different stakeholders. So they cannot say there's absolutely no engagement with members of the public. In fact, all the private sector meeting stakeholders have actually commended government for this kind of level of interaction. Various task force, the Minister for Employment has had numerous meetings with different employee groups, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, we've also, as highlighted on the weekend yesterday, we made announcement of another set of incentives, a new set of micro-enterprise concessional loan funding for those people, Mr. Speaker, sir, who want to, for example, get into a small micro-enterprise. Up to $7,000, 1 year grace period, pay the money back 4 years down the track. No monthly repayment, but just a set amount on a yearly basis. I'll give you an example. A person who's currently been working as a pastry chef down the hotel in the Coral Coast is no longer employed. Now, if that person has a particular skill set and he can bake cakes and pastries, bread, etc., he can start up his own business, supply to his village, people living around him. Now, he's got the skill set, but he does not have the funding to utilize that. That person can now get a loan of up to $7,000. We work with the Fiji Institute of Accountants, the Fiji Chamber of Commerce, the Fiji Employers Federation, the Women in Business, the MSME people, and set up a Fiji business organization that will go out. We don't want these people to come all the way to Suva. They probably cannot afford the bus fare now. There'll be people available through the FIA who can go there. They look at the submissions. Do they have the cash flow? Yes, they have the skill set. They give the approval. Government disperses the funds into their account or to the account from which they need to procure, for example, in this case, the gas oven. That's what we're doing. Up to $7,000. And those who are existing micro-enterprises, they can also get assistance for working capital. Then we have, for small enterprises, they can get up to $14,000 loan. This is for not new ones, but existing ones. So they can actually retain the employees they have. When you retain the employees you have, it means those people are getting paid wages. When their wages in their money in their pocket, they can actually go and spend. They can buy their food, look after their family. Medium enterprises, $21,000, Mr. Speaker, sir. And we expect to at least disburse about $5 million of this in the next couple of months. And again, we'll have a second wave in the next budget, because that's what the budget will be focused towards. So all these sets of measures, Mr. Speaker, sir, are being put in place with numerous consultations. About $30 million a month has been deferred in what the Honourable Member is talking about in respect of mortgage repayments. $30 million a month, we've got a report from ABIF. So the Association of Banks have been working with us. There are some people, Honourable Nawaikula said some people still have got their mortgage repayments, the banks are enforcing that. Yes, there are some people who have not paid their mortgage repayments 9 months prior to COVID-19 now want to ride on this wave. Of course, they need to be dealt with differently. But those people who, as a result of COVID-19, their businesses have been affected, their jobs have been affected, and therefore it affects the ability to do the repayment to the banks, they are being assisted. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, a number of these measures have been put in place. I urge the honourable members, I think Honourable Prasad said they've got some ideas. Please, give us, elucidate your ideas. It does not mean you can elucidate your ideas only through this committee that's going to look at cost of living, but you're going to talk about other things in the committee, Mr. Speaker, sir. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, I obviously don't support the motion, Mr. Speaker, sir, because the motion is misplaced. And there are numbers of measures that have been put in place. And of course, we all need to work together as a nation. We need to be able to hold each other's hands to be able to take us through this particular phase. And you can be rest assured, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the government is working very closely with all the different stakeholders to be able to ensure that we're able to ride through this pandemic, led through our Honourable Prime Minister as our leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Attorney General. Honourable Mitieli Bolanota, you have the floor. Don't be surprised, you were waving to me before. I'll give you the floor now.
I will be very short, sir. Even though we are discussing about COVID-19 and the effects thereof in our economy and the cost of living and so on and so forth, what we had before the COVID-19 was really serious anyway. For the economy going down, and the imports very high, exports very low, particularly in our economic sectors. And it is very important that we put our efforts into place so that particularly we're looking at the various grassroots of the people, particularly with the effects of COVID-19. There are no employments, industries and businesses closing, no employments and so on and so forth. We must make life easier for them. But we need to review some of the expenses that all these grassroots people will incur, particularly in the family level, at school education matters, particularly the textbooks and so on and so forth, and the transportation and so on, to review all those costs that are being, those are all costs of living. So it is important to review all those costs at the moment. And at the same time, we need a lot of input, revolutionize the economic sector, particularly the agriculture and the forestry, so that we can generate a lot more production here in Fiji and feed our own people and lower the cost that we need to do. So it is important that we refocus our attention to our economic sectors of Fiji from today and tomorrow. COVID-19 is very serious, and we need to look at it very seriously. And we need bipartisan approach between the two sides of the House in order to move ahead in the future. And also I'd like to say that and confirm that there is no division on this side. There may be differences, but there is no division. There are only differences. But that can be resolved. That can be resolved today, or be resolved tomorrow. And that's real democracy, not dictatorial, as we have in Fiji First government. So it is important that we have a bipartisan approach in order to reduce or review the cost of living, particularly to our families, our grassroots people here in Fiji. With those few words, Honourable Speaker, sir, thank you very much.
I thank the honourable member for his contribution to the debate. I now give the floor. Honourable Bala, do you still wish to take the floor? I'll give the floor to the Honourable Niko Nawaikula for your right of reply. You have the floor, sir.
Honourable Speaker, I wish to thank all those who supported my motion. Very important that we work together. The Honourable Prime Minister made about 5 points. First, he said the establishment of this committee will be a waste of resources. Then he said this is being done simply for political gain. And then he said also this is an example of self-interest, and that there's no need for a special committee in Fiji because we already have a low inflation rate. And finally, because there are already special measures in the response budget. A lot of those points are duplicated or repeated by the Honourable Attorney General. But I think it is sad, firstly, for the Prime Minister to be saying that, because he is on record saying that we should fight this war together. And now we are coming to him to work together, and he's running away. He's running away. So it's totally sad that is happening. And I think he missed the whole point of what the motion is, being the review of the cost of living. The Honourable Attorney General initially said this side of the House does not know the difference between unemployment and cost of living. That is very, very simplistic. Simplistic, because he, of all people, should know that unemployment will impact fiercely on the ability of a family to sustain itself. which is the cost of living. So is he implying that people who are being unemployed will not be impacted? They are the ones that we are trying to resolve this for, to address this for. Then it goes on to say, we don't need a committee because we already have a solution in the response budget. Where? I'm still looking for solutions in the response budget. There's no stimulus there. I can't find it. It was simply, in my view, a measurement to reduce expenditure so that government can reach the financial year. 305 million of jobs. Cut in the response budget. And we expected stimulus. You know, for example, we understand that tourism is dead. And there will be stimulus there for agriculture. Nothing. They cut 15 million, 16 million, they cut from the agricultural budget. And we were expecting there will be new things, like cocoa. Has he heard of cocoa? Has he heard of vanilla? Has he heard of pineapple? Nothing. They cut 16 million of a budget from the primary producers. No, I'll come back to... The point is, there is nothing. There's no stimulus there. And they missed the point totally on the cost of living. Okay, let me now come down to cost of living. And let me illustrate this, Honorable Speaker, by some examples. You know, in the most basic sense, it is the amount you spend for the basic necessities of life. That is your definition. One example, you know, I'm traveling from Fijivillage to Sabu Sabu. This time, it's $10. 3 months ago, it used to be $8. In the last year, it was $7. That is the need to establish this. That is cost of living. So that is the cost of travel has gone up unprecedentedly, without any exception. We need to review it. And then, no.
Order.
And you can make the assessment on the average family. And this is my assessment, and I'm sure I'm right, Honorable Speaker. You know, for a trip, look at a trip from Nausori to Suva is $1.80 bus. These people don't go by bus, so they're not average. This is talking about average family. So $3.60 return a day, and that's $18 in a week, just to travel from Nausori to come and work in Suva. Food, on food for a day's meal, bread is 71 cents. I'm not sure if they go, they don't go to the shop. 71 cents a loaf, butter at $2.85, quarter pound, sugar at $1.70 kg, tea at $2 a packet, a bundle of cassava now is about $10, corned beef, gone right up to $4.14, tin fish, $3.60, used to be $1.60, and bathing soap, $2. Now, on those essential needs, my calculation is that it's about $20 a day. Water bills have gone up to $50. And electricity has dramatically increased. Electricity, it was to serve their own interest. They wanted to sell shares there. And they worked in collusion with the Fiji Commerce Commission to increase it. That is cost of living. So, to survive in a day for an average family, $80. You need $80. And that's $560 a week for the basic necessities. That is cost of living. That's why we need this, to review that. Because when the bus fares go up, their voices were not heard. The bus companies went to the FCCC. When the electricity went up, the voices of the common people, the average people, were not heard. All that the government and the Fiji electricity did, they went to the FCCC. That is the need for this committee, to hear the voices of the ordinary people, to hear the voices of the ordinary family. So that is the impact, Honorable Speaker. And I can tell you this, Honorable Speaker. If you go to Laudala Beach, no, Super Point, on weekend, it's full. People looking for shells, people fishing. That is the sad impact of all this. In Nosori, people looking for kain, coming from all the way from Visari, because they're trying for their supplement. So that is the reason why we are asking for this motion, so that we can establish this and hear the views from all people. And the things that we want to achieve is that, by this, we can recommend that the minimum wage go up. That's one. We will probably recommend a reduction in the prices that are currently set by the Fiji Commerce Commission on price control. Even foodstuff and things that are under price control are not affordable. So that is an outcome that we are looking for. We might also recommend an extension of the jurisdiction on price control to other things. For example, services and other commodities like bus fares and taxi fares. So we look at it in a holistic way. That is the reason for this motion, so that this committee can look and hear not so much the interest of the government or the interest of the business people, but the views of the common and average family. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Nawaikula for his right of reply. Parliament will now vote on the motion. The question is that Parliament resolves to establish a special committee under Standing Orders 129 to review the cost of living. The members of the special committee shall comprise the following: A. Honourable V.M. Pillay, Chairperson; B. Honourable Alvik Maraj; C. Honourable Selai Andimai Tonga; D. Honourable William Voka; and E. Honourable Niko Nawaikula. Does any member oppose the motion? As there being opposition, the Parliament will now vote by acclamation. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say nay. Nay. The nays have it. The motion is therefore defeated. Secretary General.
Motion in the name of the Honourable Sitiveni Rambuka.